Hello, welcome to everyone. My name is Jeremy Sauter. I'm the Director of Membership for the French-American Chamber of Commerce in New York. It's a pleasure to have you. I see we have a nice participation of members and guests today in a variety of sectors. I see coaching, I see events, I see hospitality, food and beverage, luxury, staffing, information technologies, business schools, foundations. So delighted to have such a diverse participation reflecting the diversity of our network. And today we're talking about diversity. Whether you are working during a pandemic or in other periods, have you ever noticed that working in teams does not always go as projected, often due to questions of diversity? So Professor Michel Mieli today will help us discuss and answer your questions about this during an interactive webinar. A few words about Professor Michel Mieli. She is the interim director of the Grenoble Business School Doctoral School. She is responsible for the development of the doctoral school in the United States, and she's responsible for the upcoming opening of a part-time doctorate in management at Pace University in New York City. So Michel Mieli is an American development anthropologist and interculturalist. She's active in international education. Her work in West Africa, Central America, and Europe has consistently focused on issues linked to identity, diversity, and community, and explores how identity intersects with different organizational and cultural environments. Her research includes work on organizational diversity, migration, self-initiated expatriates, nomadic entrepreneurs, foreignness and strangeness in organizations, and gender-related questions of leadership and professional mobility. So before I let Michel start, just a few housekeeping issues. The presentation by Michel will last until about 12:40 p.m. and when we will have about 20 minutes of questions and answers. During Michel's presentation, you have the opportunity to type in questions on the questions section of your control panel. And these questions actually may be answered throughout Michel's presentation. So start asking questions as early as possible. And then at the end of the webinar, we will send you the slides of this presentation and a link to download the recording. So without further ado, I introduce you Professor Michel Mieli.
Thank you, Jeremy. Wonderful. It's wonderful to be with New York today, my afternoon, your noon. Wonderful to be able to speak to you all and to share in this time where we all are thinking about what's normal, what's not, how are we coping, how are we doing, and checking in with each other on managing ourselves and our teams and caring for ourselves and others. So I appreciated the questions that I got from the survey responses, so thank you to those who responded. And as always, I'm very interested in the American perspective, myself being American, but living in France, and very interested in these questions of how things are evolving, not only because of COVID-19, but in general in international business. So I will welcome your questions during don't feel shy at all to ask questions during the PowerPoint, and I'll just stop in every few minutes and have Jeremy tell me what's going on with the questions, all right? I hope everybody can hear me. You can let me know on the chat if you have any problems of hearing me at all right? So great. So you've gotten an introduction to me. That is what my school looks like in Grenoble. Grenoble is a lovely town in the French Alps. So that's the outside at night. And that's what Grenoble looks like from above, right? So it's a very lively city with lots of students and dynamic place to be, a technology hub, a lot like a Silicon Valley in semiconductors specifically and nanotechnology sectors, right? And we have a lot of fun because it's a mountain city. It's a little bit like a Boulder, Colorado town, so lots of sports. So this is where I'm talking to you from. And of course, I'm at home. So I live in the Chartreuse, which is one of those 3 mountain ranges above Grenoble. Chartreuse being the color green, and also a liqueur made from the mountain herbs up here. So I haven't had any today, but if I did have a glass, I would raise it to New York right now, right? I'm thinking of New York quite a bit. So I want to go through some of the questions that I asked you guys in the survey and just quickly the responses because they were interesting, right? So given the epidemic, we're all massively moving to online work, and I just wondered about your challenges and what are the things that are happening in terms of teams, right? So these are some of the responses I highlight. They're worried about how is the team doing? People look bored, right? So that's also interesting. I can't see all of you, so I don't know if you look bored.
Oh, Michelle, you muted yourself, so people cannot hear you. Michelle,
Sorry.
you muted yourself. Okay.
Can you hear me now? Sorry. So a good case in point, where we use different platforms differently. So sorry about that. But yeah, so people were worried about making sure the team is doing well. Are people bored? What's it like when you're talking to people face to face? They change personalities online. Extroverted people become introverted, etc. Right? Sticking to a schedule is harder. It takes more time to do these meetings, so we cannot go back to the way we normally worked, but we rush to do it like we did. And I think we all have to just admit we can't work the way we do face to face or in a normal mix of online and face to face. So we have to give ourselves a break. And I really appreciated those points, right? So sticking to a schedule is really hard. And then, day-to-day interactions are missing, and feeling on a team, the membership on a team feels easier when you see people. So those were very good points you raised, right? Another thing, the other questions that came up, right? So if I go back to those, independent of what's happening with COVID-19 right now, when you're working in these geographically distributed teams, when you have people in different
excuse me, Michelle.
Yes.
Are you displaying a different slide right now, because people can only view the title slide right now?
Okay, so let's see. Can you see? So I'm moving through. They're not seeing anything but the title slide.
That's correct.
So maybe I will go to this sharing format. Can people see this?
No, we only see the title slide. We only see the title slide.
Okay, so let me change that. I don't know what's happening. So if I share, let me go to share, and it should be sharing what I see. I see more than the title slide. Now, can you see the second slide or the agenda?
No, we can't. We can't. We can't. So
okay,
maybe I can move the slides for you, or let me see if you can. Let me see if I can give you. Yeah.
It was working earlier when I was changing them. Did you see that?
Okay, now I think we see. Now we see the slides with the agenda.
Okay. Is that better? I don't know what I did.
Yes.
So.
Yes.
All right. That's okay?
Yes, we see the agenda. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. So that's the agenda. That's what we're doing today, right? So we're going over the feedback. We're also going to look at the key cultural dimensions we want to keep in mind. Look at some critical incidents that I sent you guys to read. Thinking about your cultural style, and then some conclusions. All right? So let me know. Thank you for letting me know and tell me if anything changes on this, right? So I was talking about Grenoble. Now you can see the slide of a view from above Grenoble that talks to you a little bit about the city where I am talking to you from, and the university or the school of business where I am employed, right? So as I said, I'm up above the city in the Chartreuse Mountains. And this was the first question I was going over. So this is the question of these specific aspects that were difficult, right? And these are the answers that I got. Some, right? I didn't put all, but things like the team is doing well, people look bored, sticking to schedule. Being on a team is complicated when you never see the team physically, right? And the second question was, anybody want to bring up challenges that they want to look at in this workshop? And then tips or approaches that have worked well for them in terms of managing these teams, right? So these are some of the things I got. I thought they were really interesting, which are the common problems we're all having right now. How do you draw boundaries between our work and personal life when we live in a space, we're living in it and working in it, and we have lots of other people doing the same, perhaps. We have our children there, maybe. We have other people in our home doing the same. How do we stay focused, right? Taking breaks. When do you just say, I stop now, right? Working across these time zones. So there are some nice tricks we can look at for working across time zones. But your number one tool for that is an Outlook calendar, Google Calendar, which always sends invitations in the time zone concerned, right, of the person because of their settings. So that's, but time zones are complicated. Finding a common one for everyone becomes more complicated sometimes with this situation. So taking breaks is important. Stretch breaks. So I can see, you can see that one of the key words here is taking breaks, really important, right? Other people said they want to work on approach and communication style with North America, Asia, and Europe. So I've got a lot of stuff on that, right? But I think the taking break and stretch breaks, the physical breaks, are really good points because you need them more when you're doing this constant screen work. Even working with students, these born digital, Generation Y, Generation Z kids, they're very miserable right now because they're online too much themselves. So it's not just us, it's even people who spend a lot of screen time. The type of screen time we're spending is different now. All right, the other one was talking about diversity and inclusion, right? And any difficult experiences, scenarios, or issues that people want to share about these questions of diversity, right? So there were some good ones here. A groupthink problem, right? How do you honor everyone's viewpoints and experience in the best way in a team? How do we not overlook people, right? How do we realize, in fact, when we're caught up in groupthink and we're actually frozen in a way of thinking or what we call path dependency, right? And once we get stuck on what we call path dependency, it's hard to get off, right? We just see a way to do it. And that's what innovation is all about, right? It's forcing us to think that's just a groupthink or that's just a common way of thinking, but it's a bad habit. So groupthink is a habit, and it also leads to bias. So it's a very important question. Prejudice and discrimination shouldn't be tolerated, right? That's another point. So cultural sensitivity training, diversity training, yes, right? But almost a lot of times I find myself preaching to the choir. So often the people we want to influence are not very interested in doing those trainings, and they actually think that we're pushing that on them. So it's a sensitive issue, and we're going to look at that a little bit, but it's very important to think there are ways to sensitize people. And I think the third point on this list is a good way, which is the people who are most, it's like microaggressions or discrimination or problems linked to diversity. They're like mosquito bites when you go camping, right? What do we know about mosquito bites? When we go camping, some people get bit more often than others. Certain people are feeling the pressure of their diversity or their identity more than others. Things are said to them more often, little, unintentional comments are made. So asking them to share what it's like to walk in their shoes and to get empathy is a great way to really sensitize people who may not even realize they need to be sensitized, right? So we can leverage those people in our organization and let them speak up about it and support that, right? What do you enjoy about working in a diverse team of people? What aspects are enriching and rewarding? That was the fourth and final question, right? So this is what I got. It's really nice to have these people. This first point was problem solving, right? Problem solving is enhanced by diversity. They strengthen our ability, right? But it can also weaken our ability. That's so true. In fact, I'm going to talk about that today. How does it strengthen, and in what areas is it also a liability to have such diversity of viewpoints, right? The various different perspectives I get from different cultures and work experience, I like that diversity, right? So a lot of us enjoy that, right? And then when you work with diverse team, you truly see the benefits, and any company that promotes diversity, remains unbiased, will win out over a non-diverse team. And often we see that, we'll say, yes, because when people are able to have diversity, they don't make huge mistakes that will cost them. And there is something called intercultural risk management that really studies these problems. It's not just the domain of international relations and diplomacy in business. You can lose a lot of money because of these problems, right? And we see that in some of the cases I gave you, one of them specifically, people lost contracts because of this, right? So I think this is just a moment for us to say, okay, so looking at those questions and looking at the things we want to think about, we all agree we're in a specific moment here. And if we historicize it, it's a once in a generation type of experience we're going through. Hopefully, right? Hopefully these pandemics are not something that are going to become commonplace. But the scale and the magnitude of this lockdown is making us feel uncomfortable and making us ask questions. And so it's even questions about our own identity, right? Some of us may be really asking, like, who am I? Maybe the pandemic or being in lockdown is making you ask questions about yourself, and that's normal. We know that culture matters. Culture is a big word, but we also know that when we're together, co-located teams, that's a lot of work. Working with people and living with each other is hard. Geographically distributed teams are harder than co-located teams in certain ways. In other ways, you can turn off the relationship when it's their time to leave the office. And in other ways, it's hard because you don't have the face-to-face. But finally, diversity is rewarding, but diversity is messy. It's not easy, right? So it's really important. The holy grail of a lot of HRM departments and companies is diversity and inclusion, and it should be. However, any holy grail has its downsides, so we have to be open about it. We don't want to have like a crisis where we can't talk about the problems of diversity. We need to have moments where we say, yes, it's hard, because we're going to have people with different reactions, including ourselves, right? We have blind spots, all right? I hope that's clear for everybody. You can just send questions to Jeremy, and Jeremy, if you have questions, just jump in there, all right? So I use the analogy of keys, right? So we have keys that we open our doors to. You are in New York. I bet you have a bunch of different keys. Well, use that idea of the key as I always use the same one to open certain doors, and I'm used to using that key. That's the one that works. Any of you who have worked in diverse environments know after a few mistakes, you stopped perhaps thinking that it was the other's fault, that they don't understand me, what's their problem, or they just don't get it. And you looked at your key and wondered, perhaps it's your key that's the problem. And if you did that, congratulations, because that's often the problem, right, of self-reflexivity, or having the reflex to question the self instead of always pushing it on the other. And that's really a beautiful form of emotional intelligence that we're wanting to build in management, which is the ability to question the way I'm communicating with people. My key may need changing. It's not always their keys, or that door that's stupid, it's my key. All right, I hope that's clear. So that's a metacognitive ability. I question my key. Metacognition is thinking about what's happening at the moment it's happening, right? I watch myself. As a manager, I'm in a meeting. As a team member, I'm thinking all the time, what's happening here? Where am I in my learning curve? What's going on right now in this team? What do I see? What do I observe? I try to step back a little bit during the interactions. What makes me uncomfortable? How am I feeling? What's my role in the current situation, right? So those are good things we try to do. If we were ideally, we'd do it all the time. It's not very easy to do. But the question is just recognizing my non-neutrality in any situation, right? I have a role. And so when we look at these intercultural skills, we see they're important, right? So British Council and many other think tanks have worked on these questions, and they've looked at different skills that are important. And I like the small one here, which says tolerates ambiguity. You guys see that, right? Well, the ambiguity tolerance is a big one. Now you're in New York, you're used to ambiguity. There are a lot of things we don't understand, just taking a taxi in New York, or trying to figure out what a waiter is saying to us, or understanding what's happening on a street scene is ambiguous, right? Some people get really good at it and they manage it, but some people don't, right? So the question is, for the future, that ambiguity tolerance is becoming more important for employers, right, to look for as a skill. Technical and soft skills tested globally, right, it shows us that the top skills, right, if you look up at the top of that arrow, the most valued are things like demonstrates respect for others. Even if we disagree, I can respect you, right? Can build trust and work effectively in diverse teams. The top 3 skills are soft skills, right, as opposed to hard quantifiable skills that you already have to get the job, right? Open to new ideas and ways of thinking, etc. So, you know, that leads us to this question of, well, what's the difference between someone who's ethnocentric versus ethno-relative? And that's some of my research has been in that area. And generally, we're trying to move ourselves in a direction that allows us to be ethno-relative, meaning there's a moment when we can use that metacognitive ability to see that we actually need to move in the direction of the other sometimes, or evaluate what's happening with regard to, oh, well, in China, this is the way it's done, or in India, this is the way it's done, I guess. And I'm going to try to at least understand it. I don't have to force myself to adopt everything, but I can try to get where they're coming from. And that's relativism, right? We're all trying to build this thing we call cultural intelligence. So you all know emotional intelligence, right? Which is the ability to not only assess emotions in yourself, but recognize them in others, and then to motivate yourself to adapt to others, right? And then adapt to others in the team. You can then impact everybody's emotional mood. Well, cultural intelligence is very similar. This is one definition I like because it says and you've probably seen this. Certain people have an uncanny ability naturally to understand what's happening and understand that from an insider's perspective, this is what something means. So we can watch, for example, walk into a room or in a meeting, and we'll notice, for example, how when we talk, all of the people, the locals, are watching one person in the room who has the actual power. Right? So if you can pick up on those signals and understand from a local perspective what's happening by paying attention, you have a real edge, right? Because you're able to understand what looks ambiguous to others actually makes sense. And people get good at this with practice, right? Especially people working a lot international. Just a moment just to think, what's the difference between misunderstandings and disagreements? So we know what misunderstanding, but a disagreement is something that we just say we don't agree, right? We consciously disagree. Misunderstandings are things we don't know, we don't agree on, we don't understand, right? So it's an implicit disagreement versus explicit. And misunderstandings are the things that create problems in these global teams, right? The things that create a little bit of difficulty sometimes because we don't understand. So I won't go through all of this, but different models have been used to describe culture. You'll have all these slides, you can look at them. There are onions, for example, such as this one from Hofstede. There are icebergs, right? There are also definitions of culture from people like Edgar Schein who work on org culture, corporate culture. And he basically says, culture is a set of solutions. That's my favorite definition. It's just a set of solutions to 2 types of problems. Internal integration, how do I get people to work well together? And external adaptation, how do I look outside and adapt to a very dynamic environment? COVID-19 is forcing us to create now a new culture, not only with ourselves and our families, but with our teams. So we are adapting. We're trying to find a way to integrate, to work with our families and our people in our homes so that we share bandwidth and we have to eat together constantly. But we also have to be working with this external environment. And that's what you're doing every day. So that's a nice, I believe, way of thinking about culture. And that's another inverted pyramid of culture. So we have the onion, we have the inverted pyramid, and we have the iceberg. Now, some of you may have heard of Hofstede. I'm going to just briefly talk about him. Hofstede is now recently deceased, but he's a very well-known cultural anthropologist who worked on work-related cultural dimensions, right? So he has measured And he's now, this is something that's been going on since the 80s, but he's measured different dimensions of culture, right? And so I'm going to show you what it looks like, but just a few things. Now, after Hofstede began in the 1980s with this, another study came up later called the Globe Study, right? And Globe Study did a much bigger, broader research on the different leadership-related global skills we need. And these are the 9 they came up with, right? So they came up with some of the same ones as Hofstede: power distance, uncertainty avoidance, which is what we're dealing with now, by the way. We're trying to figure out what's going to happen tomorrow with COVID-19. We don't know about tomorrow. Humane orientation, collectivism versus individualism, assertiveness, gender egalitarianism, future orientation. I won't go through all those exhaustively. There are a few that are important to us, so I'm going to just go over a couple because they are directly related to the cultural scenarios I gave you, those critical incidents, right? So power distance is one, right? That's an important one. It's not just about hierarchy, but it's the degree to which members of a collective, of a group, expect power to be distributed equally. If you have a high degree of power distance, it's normal that power is distributed unequally. If you have a low power distance, it's not normal that power be distributed unequally. You want it equal. You don't appreciate or expect unequal power distribution. That's thinking of the flat organization, for example, or thinking about the steamroller of globalization and global organizations, which tend to flatten out things remarkably well. Right, so you can think about it, what it shows up. It shows up in organizational charts and decision-making processes of organizations. How does information flow? And that can be from one team to another quite different, right? There's different managerial styles. How do people dress? Do they have a fancy corner office or fancy car, etc., right? Different people have worked on this. Erin Meyer at INSEAD, okay, so she's an American anthropologist who's worked on this too, and she's actually said, well, there's leadership culture is more complex. You actually have egalitarian, top-down, so you can have multiple types of power distance, is what she's saying. And she's saying, look, if you look at Mexico and France, theirs is more hierarchical top-down, whereas Germany has also high power distance, but it's more consensual. Right, and then you have these flatter countries down here where it's more consensual egalitarian, and the US right here, well, interestingly, is top-down egalitarian compared to Denmark. So we don't really worry about consensus as much in the United States, right? And the UK is very close to us along with Canada. So there's something about these like British colonies and countries that were part of the British Empire at one point that all have something in common with England. That's kind of interesting. All right, so the 2 that I'm interested in then, so power distance, right? The other one I think I want us to look at is uncertainty, right? So this is an interesting one. It's a long name, but it's looking at the extent to which people rely on procedures or rules to alleviate the uncertainty of the future. Think of it as a little bit like risk, right? And I tell people to think about risk as what is the ultimate risk. If you think about what's your ultimate risk in business, in work, in life? Well, in life, the ultimate risk is you could die, but in business, it's failure. So the same goes when you were in school. The ultimate risk was you would fail. So we're really afraid of failure, right? We're afraid of ultimate failure. So we think about avoiding uncertainty that would lead to potentially failure. Well, it's just the opposite of what you need to do if you're an entrepreneur. So we tell you to embrace risk, and we talk about failure as good and fail-con. Well, this is the thinking about failure and thinking about fail-con is linked to this question of do we want a culture of embracing uncertainty or avoiding it? And depending on the industry you're in, you can have very different responses to that, right? So you have low uncertainty avoidance. I have a feeling you know where the United States is between low and high. If you look at this, if you have high uncertainty avoidance, there are more guidelines and more respect for rules, and people like stability versus dynamic growth, right? So in a low uncertainty avoidant corporate culture, you want to have high growth, and in a high uncertainty avoidant, you want stability and product, let's say product stability and dependability, high product quality, right? But you like structure and rituals. So big difference between certain countries on this, and it impacts a lot of things, including decision-making processes and the way we run our projects and our tasks. So project management, between those differences is very big. Risk-taking, autonomy, initiative-taking, failure attitude, like I said. And do we want to follow the rules? Do we want to break the rules? Do we want to make them more flexible, right? Do we want to be rigid or do we want to be chaotic? Too much flexibility, chaotic, too many rules, too rigid, right? So you can see their differences here, right? You can see that we have the United States is low, the UK even lower, and then you have countries like Japan or Russia or France, much higher, and G8 in general is higher than the US. That's why I tell people one of the reasons, because one of the dimensions of American culture that's very important to us is we're very impatient with time. This is a dimension linked to that time impatience. We are impatient because we're not worried about the future as much as many, many other countries. Today we are because of COVID-19. This may change that, but younger countries and countries built on risk-taking, like the US, well, they have a different relationship to this, right? I won't go through the rest of these, but you know collectivism and individualism are very important dimensions. Assertiveness is important, conflict styles, egalitarian.
Excuse me, Michelle.
Yes. Michelle. Question.
Yes. Excuse me, Michelle. Yeah, we have a question from the audience on what you said on cultural intelligence. Intelligence. So the question was, I find that when I make a mistake, it's often fleeting and in a fast-paced meeting. Maybe I have made a comment that is offensive to some, but I did not realize. When it was pointed out to me, it was often too late. How can I course correct when I did not even realize I had made a mistake in the moment?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. You know, we all do it. We're human. Thank you so much for asking that. Today, there was a joke in French that used the word Arab, and it was really not cool. I mean, it was in a meeting and someone said something and we made a joke about it, but it could have been offensive. And the person who said it put in the chat, I'm sorry, it's just an expression that uses the word Arab. I didn't mean it derogatory. You know, we have to be tolerant and say, okay, you know, these things happen, but it also, people called her out on it and she realized. So we do that and we're all guilty of it. And I don't think we mean any harm from it, but we don't even realize it. So it's normal. And cultural intelligence means realizing, and you know, you build a little bit of a reflex over time that makes you kind of step back. The next time you'll be maybe a little more cautious, but I mean, the more we interact with humans, the more we're going to find sensitivities, and we cannot avoid offending people, and it's okay. And the best way to deal with it is to say, I have blind spots. I didn't realize I was offensive. And if that offends you, I'm sorry, because the thing to recognize in our teammates is their feeling of offense is legitimate. And the worst thing is to have someone ignore when you say, well, I'm insulted by your joke. And to someone to say, well, sorry, you don't have a good sense of humor. Well, you know, maybe that person's heard that joke. That's the 5th time in that week someone has made a joke that was sexist and they felt they heard it, right? They picked up on it. Or so, you know, we have to be sensitive. So we don't realize, again, going back to building empathy, we don't realize what people have been through. And maybe they've been through something or they're going through something. So when they feel offended, we shouldn't overreact, but we shouldn't tell them they're overreacting either. That's the number one thing, is just to say, well, you know, I make mistakes. Sorry. I sincerely apologize, and take it offline and talk to them separately, because we know sometimes that's the best way. Can't do it in front of the group. You can say you're sorry, but it's better just to tell them, hey, you know. But I appreciate the question, and it's inevitable and human. We are humans, and we're going to do it. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to say things that we don't mean to say, and it comes out wrong. So just recognize it. It's great. All right. So again, here we are on gender egalitarianism. That's another dimension that is different from culture to culture. Some people, when I have students coming from certain countries, they can tell jokes that sound very sexist. I tell them, well, you can tell the jokes. I don't have a problem with it, but be ready for people to push back. And that's okay, because then they'll learn. It's a good learning experience too for people not to hide things that they would normally say. Tell them, we'll say it and we'll talk about it. I think it's better, right? It keeps things open. Future orientation, another one, performance orientation. So there's the globe study. If you go to Hofstede, if you look at this website down here, you guys, you can compare countries. So this is one where we compare China, India, and Japan. And we go, okay, China's blue, India is purple, Japan is green. And I just pointed out with some red arrows where we see big differences. We say, well, China is, so if it's, here's individualism, China is more collectivist than India or Japan, very collectivist. These are all relatively collectivist countries. Another big delta between these dimensions, uncertainty avoidance. Japan is very, very uncertainty avoidant compared to China and India. So that's kind of interesting. It just kind of helps us looking at those dimensions. You can go to that website and do country comparisons. Another one between France, Germany, and Norway. They seem similar, but they're pretty different on power distance, where France is much higher, according to Hofstede, of course. It's not a perfect score. Masculinity, right? Score, Norway is very feminine. So we can see these things, right? And the final one, we have Colombia, Russia, and the US, just to compare. And we see that Russia is much more long-term oriented than Colombia or the US. And when it comes to individualism, we have the, let's see, is that right? Yes. We can see that the United States is very different, right? Like we have Colombia, which is much more collectivist than Russia or the United States, very individualist, right? So we see that. So it's interesting for us to just consider and ponder these differences when we're working and say, maybe these things can help account for some bizarre experiences I'm having, right? We have time relationships difference. I won't go into this too much, but some people are monochronic, punctual, they really segment their time. Others are more polychronic and they stretch out time. They tend to be less punctual, right? We have lots of different dimensions you can look at, right? Communication styles. But this is what I want to get to. I wanted to get to this really quickly. This is what we were really worried about, is the future is complex and it's intercultural. And that's the team stuff, right? So when we're working in these teams and we want to resist this problem of, othering, and we're going to talk about that, we have to change positions, right? So we have to make ourselves a little bit more vulnerable to being surprised. We have to strive to say, well, when I'm going into working in a team of people who are really different from mine, I have to accept that there are strange things in them, but maybe the things that are strange in them are also the things that I have not resolved. And that's in cross-cultural psychology, we study that, right? We say the other is a revealer of things that are unresolved in many ways. So resisting othering. So othering is something that's been studied recently quite a bit because of online harassment, cyberbullying, whether it be misogynistic or racist, right? But it's very common today because of the way online things work, right? So it's kind of a set of dynamic processes that engender marginality and persistent inequality because we separate others, right? It's easy to do. It can be about religion, sex, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic or class, right? Skin color, right? But they're different, but they're the same because they have a similar mechanism or underlying dynamics, right? So that's something that we're all thinking about. And that's why people are telling us these are important issues, right? So this is the backdrop to what's going on in our politics today is across the world. There's populism and we have othering happening massively, right? But we all belong to groups and that's important, right? And we have this question of we belong and we don't belong in other groups, right? We need recognition and we don't want to be stigmatized. COVID-19 is stigmatizing certain people, right? So we understand that immediately in the epic pandemic we're in, people are experiencing being separated, but we also belong to groups. So othering is natural. When we belong, maybe we separate. But if we look at someone like Anthony Appiah, he tells us, well, at the end of the day, and he's not the only person who said this, but his golden rule is I'm human, nothing human is alien to me. he's just basically quoting Terence, who is a Roman, a writer from the period of the Roman Empire, who was from North Africa. And he had been a slave, and he was a freed slave, and he wrote that in Latin. The idea is humanity is the condition of being sapiens, and it doesn't really matter all the rest. All the rest is a constructed difference we've built up and invented to make a difference, but we're all sapiens, and I think that's important. All right, so finally, diversity creates problems. Yes, we have linguistic problems. What's going to be our lingua franca, or our common language? How do we manage language and fluency gaps? Cognitive style problems. How do we learn and solve problems? That was brought up a lot. Personality style differences. A lot of it's just personality too, guys, right? So the Scott page gives us some answers, and I just want to look at that before we move on. Scott page says, yeah, diversity is good because it gives us skills diversity, perspectival diversity. We interpret things differently because of that, right? We can actually use different tools like heuristics, and we can predict different outcomes and forecast things differently because of that. So cognitive diversity is a very good thing to have in a team. Now, he also says, in general, it creates better results. You can put together a group of brilliant people who are all experts. Their results at the end of the day of problem solving will be less well, they will perform less well together than a team of people who are non-experts and who are heterogeneous or non-homogeneous. Meaning, the more people resemble each other, the less they perform well together. So if you're problem solving, or if you're trying to create a disruptive innovation, you need diversity. If you want to go fast to market and you don't want a lot of debate, maybe you want less diversity. That's the message, right? But most of us say, if we want to problem solve and we're in business, it's a good thing. It takes time. We fight. And that's another problem, right? I won't go through this, but I want us to look at just groups are complex, teams are complex things, right? And one of the things we know is that cultivating trust is the #1 problem with these global teams, right? So your goal is to cultivate trust. It may mean after that meeting where someone got unhappy, you do a separate call with them. You do some repair work. You make sure that everybody realizes we have the best interest of people and we're benevolent. We make mistakes. We have communication barriers, right? We have people who literally, they're just not picking up because there's a fluency gap, right? If we always are sticking to English, it's hard for a lot of people. We have to also align goals, and that's hard. People have a lot of different perspectives on what's important, what are the priorities, right? So these multicultural teams are difficult to manage, and perception management is really important for us as leaders. Relationship management is important, and managing ourselves, right? So those are the ideals. And in an ideal world, we would do all those things. In a realistic world of COVID-19, we do what we can to get our job done and to keep things going as well as we can, but it won't be like normal. And we cannot have the same level of performance, right? So it's a good time for us to think. Now, I gave you guys these critical incidents. I would like us to discuss them. There was #1, #2, #3. The ones I want to look at, these are kind of small. I probably need to blow these up. But if you can read these, I have #2 was interesting because it's about North Africa and Germany. And I thought that was an interesting one. And I also thought that there was another one, which was #6 was interesting. But I wondered if anybody would like to now that we have to open it up to you guys, if there was something else you want to talk about, if you read one of those and you would like to go through it, you're welcome to share in the chat which one you're interested in talking about. We'll just highlight one of those, and then you can give your insights into the question. Maybe you want to talk about just one of the questions, but it's really, all these are trying to get us to understand what are the expectations of the other, right? What are we missing? So I will just stop talking now and see if people have a chat question. Jeremy, I will hand it over to you if you see anything. Otherwise, I'll just start going over one of these and then ask people for input. All right.
Yeah, I don't see questions right now, but okay. Please please, you can log on your questions in the questions section, and so in the meantime, Michelle, you can go on.
Okay. Well, why don't we just look at, because we went over very quickly some cultural dimensions. Some of you may know this, but some of you are like, this is new. So power distance, uncertainty avoidance, individualism, right? These are kind of common terms, but they're not always used in the workplace. The reason I want you guys to know some terms is because one of the problems is we kind of, when we use anecdotal words, we can offend people more. And so one of the questions was, when I make little comments, because I'm thinking like, well, for example, the people in Colombia are always late to the meeting and they're always telling jokes, right? They like small talk. So I may say something like, you guys are always chit-chatting, but we need to get down to business, right? And for them, that's anecdotal because that's based on your opinion. What if you would say something like, okay, I know that for a lot of the people in this room, it's really important because they're collectivists. They need to have discussion before they get to business. They need to talk about stuff. And I think that's a nice way of kind of, we can use these words a little bit to get away from anecdotes. So let's look at this one really quickly. 3 senior managers from a telecoms company in France went to a big critical supplier in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. The French were the customers, and they had this perspective of the customer is always right, and we can demand what we want. They met the Saudis right there and directly started working. They demanded what they needed, and the Saudis saw this as an aggressive tone. They said, we need this, and we need this now. So once they started, they went directly, they asked for a discount on agreements and threatened to take the business to another company if the request was ignored. Now, the Saudi counterparts immediately stopped talking, looked at them, stood up abruptly, left. When they left, the taxi driver that was waiting for the Frenchman saw the taxi drive away, saw those Saudis walk away, and he drove away too because he understood implicitly that the French had offended his fellow countrymen. So now you have 3 Frenchmen stranded at a meeting, not understanding what happened, right? It's an interesting case, the kind of thing that can happen when you do international business. So I just wondered, and this can happen to you with your counterparts in countries where you have things like collectivism. And I wonder what you think, and I wonder if anybody has inputs. So you can tell me what you think about this, and if you've encountered something like this, or what are the other dimensions? Because this Saudi case could be the case with many other cultures, not just people from the Middle East, right?
Excuse me, Michelle.
Yes.
Michelle, yeah. I don't know if you want to answer these questions now or later, but I thought I would inform you of some questions that
Sure.
were asked by the audience.
Great.
So the first one is, can you tell us about the best practices, do's and don'ts you have seen or would advise in relation to team management to better cope with the pandemic situation? So that's one question. And then we have another question. I thought that recently some of the terms used by Hofstede and Trompenaars, the 2 thinkers you mentioned, were revised to avoid femininity, masculinity, which were seen as possibly offensive in 2020. Do you have a view? Thank you.
Yeah, great. Super. Thank you so much for those. Yes, so, first of all, for team management, there's a lot of new stuff coming out, right? So we're reading a lot about, how are we going to work better together? And I think one of the things that I'm hearing a lot, and I've been sitting in a lot of meetings, is in France, we're in our 3rd week now of full lockdown, and people are now, in fact, we're starting our 4th week, I guess, right? We've done 3 weeks. We started March 16th. So, one of the things I'm seeing is we're telling each other now, we're going to have to lower expectations for the whole team. And we're also going to have to be carving out specific time when we're going to respond. So one of the first things I would tell you guys is what we need to all do now is to set up expectations and send a message when we've agreed on something, send a message to everyone and say, actually, these are the days when I'm going to be able to be more active with this team. And these days I won't be. So either you put an auto reply or you organize your inbox. And that's something that I'm working on myself because I've found myself in the last 3 weeks overwhelmed by certain needs that are making me ignore other things that are equally important. So I think we need to clarify with team members, have clear expectations. These are the, we'll meet. I think you need to meet regularly. You need to talk, have a dedicated time for the whole team to meet, but not very long. You know, keep it to 45 minutes. And if things go too long, let's take it offline. Let's talk about that separately because it's really easy to get pulled into discussions that not everybody's interested in. So take it offline if it's peripheral to the team. And the team meeting is also just like, how are you doing? You can even have like a go around the table and just take 45 minutes to hear how every person's doing. And then you'll talk about business. So you separate maybe just, 45 minutes to an hour altogether. First thing. But the second thing is honestly set expectations for the time you're going to be able to spend with your team. And it depends on your job, I know, but if you can tell people to be realistic, you can tell them if it's urgent, call, send a text. If not, these are the days I'm going to answer my email. And I think you have to really tell everyone that. And it depends on your business, and I know it's hard, but you have to carve out time. Otherwise, you're going to be really overwhelmed and everything is going to be important and you'll never get off your mail. You'll never get off your phone or your Zoom, right? Okay, so that's really, really important, ending things and letting people have a break. The second question, yes, Fons Trompenaars. So Fons Trompenaars didn't work on this as much. It's Hofstede in the 1980s, he called feminine cultures and masculine cultures. Feminine cultures are ones that are focused on corporate cultures, right? Or even national cultures, focused on harmony, equity, equality, care for everyone. Kind of like, universal health care kind of idea. But if you look at it in a company level, right, you have certain managers that have that approach. And others that are more masculine, and what he called masculine was competitive, contest culture, pay for performance, speed is really important, like going faster and getting things done and being achievement oriented. And he called that masculine, but that today doesn't fly. So that's cool. You can see the evolution of what's acceptable speech. Now it's not called that, it's called achievement orientation, right? And so there's a gender question there. So we don't like that, kind of stereotyping women is this way and men is this way. But at the time it was acceptable, right? Trompenaars doesn't work on that quite as much. He has a different dimension. So I put Trompenaars' website in the bibliography, the last page to look him up. There's a lot of good readings from him. He's a great resource as well as Hofstede, because both of them have worked on interesting dimensions of culture to help explain these crazy things that we experience, right? Any other questions, Jeremy?
Yes. Yes, we have another question here. We have a question regarding how do you recommend we balance being, quote unquote, our own culture versus signaling to international counterparts that we know who they are and where they come from?
Great. That's a great question. It says, how much should I let them know that I know? And I think it's really important when you're going to meet with people from a given culture that you can just do things that will immediately break the ice. You may not have to say very much. For example, I always tell people, if you're going to be working with someone from India, look up what's going on in India right now. Stay away from politics and religion, like in all cultures, because it's too complicated in all countries. But definitely think about something that's important to them. Think they like cricket, talk about cricket. Has there been a holiday? The holiday is kind of a neutral thing. Maybe you can mention, right? There was a holiday in India recently. What's happening? you can just try to show that you're interested in their history, right? Say, oh, I read about this. Any type of, let's say, cultural artifact that's a little bit interesting to you, and it's not something that's going to be offensive, right? So anything about history, holidays, sports, shows an interest, right? Or how do you guys manage the time difference within India? How do you manage the huge cultural distance between North and South? Showing that you know something about a country, they already see that you're not ethnocentric. You're interested, and that goes a long way. So obviously, you're situated in your culture, and no matter what you do, you'll be stereotyped for being from that culture. That's who you are, and that's good. So we embrace it, right? Yeah, I'm American. I'm proud of it. Yes, there's stereotypes about Americans, and that's okay, right? I have stereotypes in my mind about other cultures too. So where we belong very much in our own culture, we don't have to adopt the other's behaviors, but we adapt a little bit to showing that we're interested. And if we're genuinely interested and we act curious, people will immediately be impressed because they're used to you see, we have this thing. It's a really good question because it means there is a country hierarchy and there's soft power. If you're from a country that has a huge amount of economic power, you're higher up on the hierarchy of country power. There's more prestige associated with your country. So when you're from a country like that, you're not really always used to going into all the details and learning about what's happening in a country besides the stereotypical things. But if you're from a country with a lot of power like the US and you show interest in a smaller country, it means 10 times more to them than you can imagine because they know much more about our countries, right? Europe and the United States often than you know about theirs. So us showing that means more symbolically than anything else, and we have to pay attention. And anyone in the audience who's from a small country knows that there's a small country psychology. There's also, there's a lot of complexes around being from a small country, and also there's a huge problem of diaspora that they're managing also. So being interested in them it goes a long way. So I think it's a great question. It generated some ideas. Anything else?
No, we don't have other questions, Michelle. Yeah, so I don't know if you want to go on.
Well, I see the time, right? So I want to just say that, if anybody, this is very short. It was kind of a way to just get started. We have a lot going on. I really appreciate you just even being here in this period. Having participated during COVID-19 lockdown, to giving yourself a break, to take a step back and to look at the big picture, not only about your team and working in a diverse team that's also now very much separated and virtual, but also just thinking about your work and the bigger picture, because we will get past this, we'll go back to work and we'll remain in a globalized world that may be changed in certain ways, but we're not going to change overnight. So we're going to go back to these same issues in a whether it be co-located or separate. So I just want to applaud you for joining and thinking about these things. And I would be very happy to do a second session where we go through other things that you're interested in, and you can even kind of pick and choose topics from my slide set and say, let's go into that in more detail. And here's my case. I want to talk about a case. I can anonymize a case and we can talk about one of your cases. So I don't want to belabor the cultural incidents I've put up here, but if you want to talk about those or anything else, we could do another session anytime, maybe say in a month's time. So I'd be happy to do more, but it's also, the hour has passed. So I don't want us to go over that.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's all thank Professor Michelle Miele for all these great insights and concepts about managing intercultural teams and diverse teams. So again, we will send you a copy of the slides and a link to download the recording. And we look forward to seeing you online at the future webinars of the French American Chamber of Commerce. Thank you. Thanks to you all. And thank you, Michelle.
Take care of New York. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.